Hi again, gang. Today we're going to talk about a few important points that literary critics have made about the Iliad by Homer. Scholars don't know exactly when this epic poem was written, but studies in language evolution indicate it was sometime between 760 and 710 BC. Sources for this presentation are J.W. McHale, Bernard Knox, and Benjamin Sammons. Full bibliographic information about these guys is on the Masterwork cited sheet for the first unit. Now, many people think that the Iliad is the story of the Trojan War. But according to literary critic J.W. McHale, that's not true. As McHale explains, the war lasted for 10 years, and the Iliad covers only a few weeks in the last year of the war. Instead, the Iliad is the story, really, of an argument between two powerful Greeks, Agamemnon and Achilles. In fact, according to McHale, the Iliad is actually about the wrath of Achilles. Now, literary critic Bernard Knox agrees that the Iliad is about Achilles' anger, and he states that it particularly focuses on how Achilles grows from being a self-centered hero to a man who is at least capable of empathy and compassion. Consequently, in order to understand the Iliad, it's important to understand Achilles' wrath, what causes it, why Agamemnon's attempt to lure him back to battle with the promise of gifts is unsuccessful, and why Patroclus' death is successful in doing so. At the beginning of the Iliad, Achilles is characterized by what Knox calls a godlike self-absorption that is driven by his rage as well as a strong sense of honor. Knox further explains that Achilles' wrath may be godlike, but is also very lonely, and Achilles is himself a prisoner of it because he sees the rest of the world as being excluded from his anger. But Knox maintains that the path of his anger helps him to return to the stature of a mortal human being by the end of the epic, even if that path is covered with Greek and Trojan bodies. Let's talk about the reason for Achilles' wrath. Achilles' wrath is initially triggered when Agamemnon loses his own trophy woman and takes Achilles. Now, it's important to understand that the spoils of war meant much more than their material value in ancient times, according to literary critic Benjamin Sammons. In ancient Western culture, the king, in this case Agamemnon, divided spoils of war up among the warriors as a sign of honor for their contribution to the battle. So when Agamemnon takes Briseis, he is taking more than just a woman from Achilles in the eyes of the warrior and of the Greek audience who would have originally been the audience for the epic. Agamemnon is actually taking part of Achilles' honor, which in that era would have been much more important than a mere woman, Sammons explains. Now, taking Briseis is not the first thing Agamemnon has done that angers Achilles. After Agamemnon takes Briseis, Achilles confronts him in a long speech that names some of the actions Agamemnon has taken in the 10 years of the war that Achilles thinks makes him a terrible leader. But while taking Briseis might have only been the last straw, it was, as Knox points out, enough to make Achilles refuse to take part in any battles and basically sulk in his ship. As Knox says, Achilles' refusal to fight has dire consequences for the Greek army. Led by Hector, the Trojan army is able to wipe out a huge number of Greek soldiers because Achilles refuses to participate in the next battle. Achilles refusing to fight is important for two reasons. First, of course, Achilles is the mightiest of the Greek warriors. But a more important reason might be the effect his refusal to fight has on the Greek army's morale. But as Knox points out, in spite of the toll on Greek lives, Achilles refuses to return to battle even after Patroclus tells him that some mighty soldiers that Achilles has fought beside for years have been slain. Now Knox maintains that the casualties in the battle should have been enough to prove Achilles' superiority and restore his honor, and he does relent a little. But as Knox says, he just can't let go of his anger. He thinks that if he loans Patroclus his armor and lets him wear it in battle just long enough to drive the Trojans back from the Greek ships, the Greeks will recognize Achilles' importance and demand that Briseis be returned to him as a sign of honor. Throughout his exchange with Patroclus, Achilles is conflicted by confused emotions and may not know what he really wants, according to Knox. But by the end of his speech, Achilles wants all of the Greeks and Trojans except him and Patroclus to die, so the pair could bring down the walls of Troy all by themselves. Knox says that what Achilles wants is a world that contains nothing but him and his personal honor. A council of Greek warriors meets with Agamemnon to discuss the importance of getting Achilles to return to battle. And Agamemnon makes what appears to modern readers to be a very generous offer of gifts if Achilles submits to him. But the offer makes Achilles even angrier, so angry in fact that he announces that he's going to pack up his ship and return to Greece. Why does the offer make Achilles so angry? One reason is that it's just too much. As literary critic Benjamin Sammons points out, the number and value of the gifts turns the offer into a gift attack, and Agamemnon is fully aware of this. The Greek audience that the Iliad was written for would have seen that because of the abundance of the gifts, all the offer really does is assert Agamemnon's superiority and leave Achilles in his debt. Now, Odysseus, who presents Agamemnon's offer to Achilles, is cunning enough not to tell him that Agamemnon expects Achilles to submit to him, as Knox points out. Now, the Greek word for submit was actually usually used to mean taming wild horses, the taming of a bride by her husband, or the subjugation of a defeated enemy warrior to a ruler. Agamemnon uses the word to strip even more honor away from Achilles, and the clever Odysseus is smart enough to know not to repeat it. But according to Knox, Achilles isn't fooled. He sees exactly what Agamemnon is attempting to do, which is to dishonor him and exert his superiority even more than he already has. Now, Achilles' mother, the goddess Thetis, has foretold that two possible fates await Achilles. He will either live a long, prosperous life or die in a great battle and assure that his name lives on forever. Knox says that with his emphasis on honor, Achilles would rather die in battle and secure his place in history. But he is so enraged by Agamemnon's continuing refusal to show him the honor he deserves that he decides to opt for a long, prosperous life instead. Let's talk a little bit about what happens after Patroclus is killed. Now, when Hector kills Patroclus, believing he is Achilles, Achilles' wrath reaches a boiling point, and he returns to the battle to kill Hector. As Knox states, Achilles' decision is not an indication that he in any way accepts Agamemnon's attempt to dishonor him further, and it doesn't reflect any kind of self-criticism or regret that his fight with Agamemnon has led to the young warrior's death. He doesn't fight for the honor of the Greeks or to further their goal of capturing Troy and returning Helen to Menelaus. He fights Hector only to avenge Patroclus' death, Knox states. And Achilles makes sure that Agamemnon knows that he is fighting Hector only to avenge Patroclus' death. Now, Knox points out that even though Achilles' short speeches come as close as Achilles is ever likely to admitting that he was wrong, Agamemnon replies by attempting to justify his own actions by saying that he was blinded by anger that came from fate and the gods. Achilles completely rejects Agamemnon's attempt to justify his actions, and he sees them as excuses. But as we shall see when we discuss Medea, Homer's Greek audiences would have viewed Agamemnon's justification as being valid because they believed that emotions didn't come from inside people but from the gods and fate. The battle between Hector and Achilles is a battle between two opposing approaches to conflict. Knox points out that Hector retains a sense of civilized responsibility and restraint to the very end, while Achilles is characterized by his self-absorbed fury. As we know from earlier scenes, Hector has no personal interest in defeating the Greeks. He fights throughout the war for his people, and they are on his mind as he battles Achilles, Knox says. But when Hector dies, Achilles exults with words that reveal that he's only fighting for himself and his personal satisfaction of the hatred that he holds for Hector, not for the victory that killing Troy's greatest warrior represents for his country. Knox maintains that Achilles' speech demonstrates that his reconciliation with Agamemnon's and the Greeks, to the degree that he has reconciled with them, was a mere formality, and he is still cut off from humanity as a prisoner in his own self-centeredness. Now, Knox points out that Achilles does seem to be a different man during the traditional funeral games held after Patroclus's pyre is burned. Knox says that during the games, Achilles conducts himself with princely courtesy and nobility. But the funeral games are a situation outside of combat, and might give us a glimpse of the kind of man that Achilles might have been if peace had been possible in Homer's world, Knox states. The change in Achilles is obviously short-lived, though, because after the games, he savagely drags Hector's body around Patroclus's funeral pyre. It's when Priam meets with Achilles to beg for his son's body that we finally see some growth in Achilles' character, Knox states. When Achilles begins weeping, it is with self-absorption that he is demonstrated throughout the poem because it's focused on his reflections on how his own death would hurt his father. But then he moves to an admiration for Priam's bravery and pities him his loss. For the first time, Knox says, Achilles is able to see things from a point of view other than his own. But he knows that this new approach has only a tenuous grasp on him, and that at any moment he might return to the self-centered rage that he is more accustomed to and more comfortable with. But even this admission proves growth, Knox says, because it demonstrates self-awareness, self-criticism, and a new reluctance to violence. This new self-knowledge and movement to prevent violence moves Achilles from being godlike, as he is often referred to in the poem, to being a human being in the full sense of the word, Knox concludes. Achilles finally admits that he is subject to the limitations and mortality that unite all people, and this movement from self-absorbed wrath to a recognition of human values is a major theme of the Iliad, Knox says. Okay, as always, thank you so much for studying this presentation. I hope that it helped you understand a little bit more about at least one aspect of the Iliad. There are lots and lots and lots of aspects to study about this work, believe me. If you have any questions, you know all you have to do is drop me an email through Canvas. I love hearing from students, so please get in touch with me anytime you'd like to about, well, anything. We'll talk again soon, and in the meantime, have some fun.